This is something that I tried to explain. I did a video on Pinocchio, a couple of videos about Pinocchio, which I've been quite fascinated by, because it's a very good illustration in popular culture of how archetypes manifest themselves, and how people understand the archetypes, even if they don't know they understand them. Because Pinocchio is a very interesting movie, if you think about it. You know, you might ask, well, when modern people think about people going to church, they think, well, how can people believe those foolish superstitions? It's like, yeah, fair enough, good question. Well, what the hell do you think you're doing when you go to a movie? It's like, what are you doing? Here you are. I know you probably haven't seen Pinocchio lately, but whatever. You know, it's the same thing. You're an adult. You bring your 5-year-old to see Pinocchio, and you're just as entranced as he is. And think about what you're doing. First of all, you know those are drawings. They're not real creatures. They're drawings. Second, they're about a puppet. A wooden puppet who actually happens to wander around, who is being guided through life by a cricket, whose highest goal is to fail for reasons no one can understand. And somehow that makes a fairy turn him into something that's real. It's like, that's strange, people, right? The fact that you're doing that is very peculiar. And it says something about what people are like. It means that we understand things that we don't know we understand. And so Pinocchio is it's a very interesting movie. I can tell you what its fundamental presupposition is. I'll just guide you through it very, very rapidly. So, the beginning of the movie, Geppetto, who's the archetype of the good father, by the way, which is an archetype that we've forgotten about, but it does exist because our culture isn't just a tyrannical patriarchy, as you can tell by the fact that we're warm and comfortable and we're not tearing each other to shreds at the moment, which is what you do in a state of absolute chaos, right? It's mayhem while you're freezing and starving, right? And that isn't what we have. We have peace, and it's rare, and it's amazing that we have it. And we shouldn't take it for granted, because it's not the normal order of things. The normal order of things is destructive chaos. And if you're fortunate enough to live somewhere that's peaceful and productive, you should thank your lucky stars every second of your life. And if you don't do that, all it means is that you don't know anything about history, and you know nothing about human beings. Because things can get absolutely monstrous, and it happens all the time. And there's always a fraction of the population who thinks that's how they'd like things to be. And perhaps there's a fraction of you that's like that too. And I wouldn't nurture that fragment if I was you, unless you want to go where it will take you. And anyways, back to Pinocchio. So Geppetto's a good guy, right? And you can tell that he's got a warm house, and it's full of toys, and it's full of music boxes, and you know, he's got a little kitten, and he's got a goldfish, and he takes care of them, and so he's a good guy. He makes this puppet, and then he puts a mouth on the puppet, and that's the final act, so the puppet can have its capacity to speak. And that's what you want if you're a good father, is you want to take your son and you want to turn him into someone who can speak, right? Who can speak his soul. And so Geppetto puts a smile on his son's face and says, wouldn't it be wonderful if he could be a good boy? It's like, yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful, right? Because that's what you do if you're a good father. You think, wouldn't it be possible if this puppet could actually become something genuine and independent with its own voice? Well, he says that's unlikely, and goes off to bed. And then a star appears up in the window, and he wishes on a star. And you think, what does that mean? What does it mean to wish on a star? It's like, well, a star is the light that beckons in the darkness, right? And it's something transcendent. You look up into the night sky, and it's awe-inspiring. Whether you're religious or not, you're looking into the infinite. Well, you make a relationship with the infinite by wishing on a star. You raise your eyes above the horizon and point at the light that beckons in the darkness. And you say, I wish more than anything else that my son could become a real person. It's like, that's what you do if you're a good father. You don't want to make him into a slave. You don't want to be a tyrant. You don't want him to be a puppet. You want him to be something strong and independent. Well, so off Pinocchio goes out into the world, right? And he faces all these different moral problems. He's armed with his conscience. It turns out to be a bug, right? Well, why? Well, it's because things bug you. You know, your conscience bugs you. And the reason that the conscience is Jiminy Cricket is because that's the same initials as Jesus Christ. And Jiminy Cricket is southern U.S. slang for Jesus Christ. And no doubt the animators thought that was very comical. And I'll tell you that the bug is a very strange representation of Christ, that's for sure. Who would make him into a cricket? And he's also rather error-prone in the movie, so because the movie doesn't have precisely a formal Christian structure. But part of the reason, this took me a long time to figure out too, is that you have to have a dialogue with your conscience. But it has to be a dialogue because it's actually not 100% right. It has to be something that you build by having a discussion with it across time, and that's actually what Pinocchio does with Jiminy Cricket as the movie progresses. Both the puppet and the conscience get wiser by banging themselves against the world. And the puppet has to resist the temptation of easy fame and celebrity. That's the first temptation, right? Because he's asked to be an actor, which is an easy way to be celebrity. It's like the Kardashians, right? It's status without responsibility or competence. And so that beckons as an attraction. And then he learns that lying is a very bad idea, right? That's why his nose grows, so he has to get that sorted out. And then he's asked to present himself as a victim of circumstances. That's what the fox and the coyote do. And when he decides that he's too ill to go back to school, they take him to Pleasure Island, where he's trained to be a jackass that works for slavers in the salt mines. Right. Well, not bad for animation, I would say. And then at the end of the movie, he tries to go back home because he's terribly lost and he's half jackass because the people at Pleasure Island have taught him to do nothing but bray, which I can't help but think offers, or what would you say, is an appalling parallel to what's happening to people who are being educated in modern universities, right? Which are increasingly playhouses where you're taught to bray. I mean, listen, I can't listen to protesters. It's just painful. It's this constant repetition of soulless nonsense. The reason it's so loudly chanted is because the protesters are trying to convince themselves even more desperately than they're trying to convince the people that they're talking to. So anyways, Pinocchio goes back home, half jackass and half dead, and he tries to find his father, but there's no going home, right? Not once you're an adult, once you're a young adult. You don't get to go back home because there isn't anyone there that can tell you what to do anymore. And so Pinocchio goes home and his father isn't there, and he finds out that he has to go to the bottom of chaos itself to rescue his father. And that's what we have to do, right? Because our civilization is in a state of crisis, and that was predicted long ago by people like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. And partly what you're trying to do when you go to university is to go to the heart of darkness, right? To the place that terrifies you the most, and to find what values your culture really has. And that's what it means to go down to the bottom of the depths, to the thing that terrifies you the most, and to revivify your father. It's a very old story. The Egyptians were telling that story 4,000 years ago. It's one of the oldest stories of mankind. And so that's what you have to do. You unite yourself with your culture so that you're more than just a weak and simple-minded individual, right? You dedicate yourself to the study of what's great about the past, and you incorporate it so that there can be something to you. And then you bring your father back up to the surface so that the culture can see and live again. And then that makes you into a real individual. Well, that's the movie. Well, we watch it. We're captivated by it. Now it's time to understand it. It's time to understand it in an articulated and conscious manner, because it's too late for us to be unconscious anymore. And so we have Scylla and Charybdis. We have the chaos of the left. And the left says, well, we need to tear down structures because they oppress. It's like, well, obviously structures oppress, because something's good at the top of a structure and not so good at the bottom. So if you have any value structure, it's going to privilege some things and exclude others. But if you scrap the value structures, then there's nothing to live for. So we can't do that. That's just chaos. And then the radical right says, back to the nation. It's like, really? You know, we went back to the nation a couple of times, and it doesn't really look that great. And part of the reason for that is that the purpose of the nation isn't the nation. The purpose of the nation is to produce citizens who transcend and rejuvenate the nation. And so the nation should be properly subordinated to the individual, right? To the divine individual, for that matter. And that's what we figured out in the West. Now, it isn't that we only figured that out in the West, but so far we've been fortunate enough to put it into reasonable practice in our political institutions. And thank God for that. At least it's worked somewhere. And we'd be completely foolish to give that up, because look at what it's provided us with. It's remarkable. We're free. As free as we can be. That doesn't mean that we're happy, because freedom and happiness are not the same thing at all. But we did figure out that the state should be subordinate to the wisdom of the individual, to the sight and the wisdom of the individual. But that puts a heavy responsibility on everyone. That means you have to be the wise individual who can see and speak. That's your job. And if you do that, the thing that's so cool about that is, you need a meaning in your life that enables you to bear the suffering of your life without becoming corrupted. That's the basic rule. And you have to build yourself into something that you can actually respect so that you can see yourself bearing that terrible existential burden properly. And then you don't lose hope and you don't lose meaning because you can see that you're strong enough to stand up underneath that burden. And then there's something about you that you can respect and that maybe other people can respect. And that will help bring suffering in the world to an end. And that will help people develop fully as individuals. And that will enable us to avoid the dehumanizing, rigid, sterile uniformity of the nationalistic left and the appalling, chaotic, devouring chaos of the radical left. How about no? The individual. That's the secret to the world. And you're all individuals, and so you're all the secret to the world. And all you have to do to discover that is pick up your damn responsibility. Stop listening to people who keep burdening you with rights. How many goddamn rights do you want, man? It's like you need some responsibility. So pick it up. Open your eyes and learn how to make yourself articulate. And that way the world won't descend into the series of hells that it already descended into in the 20th century.
With power and freedom come ultimate responsibility and accountability. I think one of the biggest issues we currently face is that we've trivialized our lives and how easy it is to survive. We play our little niche role in society and our needs are more or less taken care of. Since we no longer have that burden of having to worry about how we are going to feed ourselves or stay alive, we've lost that self-determination that we previously had to be self-sufficient, functioning, accountable human beings. The state wishes to control more aspects of our life by not allowing us to be responsible and accountable for our actions. The state hopes to attain the power to determine, not for us, what is right or what is wrong, at the cost of individual liberty. Take the war on drugs, for example. I think all drugs should be legal, that way you take the corruption out of it, and then people are held accountable for their actions. By those actions, you should have the freedom to do whatever you like to yourself as long as you aren't infringing on somebody else's rights, liberty, or property. Go be a drug addict, but don't come looking for handouts when you're inevitably in the gutter. Based on your decisions, you need to be held accountable for your actions. The state cannot provide your basic needs for you. That will only lead to tyranny. The role of government is to protect the rights, liberty, and freedom of its citizens. Nothing else. Not provide any entitlements such as healthcare, education. These systems are inevitably a mess because everything the government takes control of, they screw up and end up serving their own interests. When governments get too big, they will inevitably look out for their own self-interest. They cease being for the people. We've become more reliant on the state to provide our needs for us, as opposed to us being responsible to self-determination and bearing ultimate responsibility for our actions. Take the youth of today. They are the product of state involvement and are becoming more reliant on the state to provide for them their basic needs. They're being accountable and able to provide for themselves as the generations go by. This is not by coincidence. This is by design. More rights and freedoms for every citizen, less state involvement. Let's get back to embracing individualism over collective state reliance. Hold our representatives accountable and take our individual power back, just like our forefathers had intended.